Andrea Carter-Brown is the author of September 12th. Her poems have won the 5 Points James Dickey Prize, the River Styx International Poetry Prize, and the PSA Gustav Davidson Memorial Prize, among many others. And since 2017, she's been the series editor of the Word Works Washington Prize. And she's here just now. How are you today?
I'm just great. So happy to be with you today.
Yeah, well, we're so happy to have you on the show. Now, your new poetry book is September 12th, and it's about 9/11, really. So I'm guessing it's mainly about the day after?
The day after, it's about the day. It's about the world before in New York that changed that day. It's about what I call the aftermath, which extends to the present day. I would say that the day and the day after are only about a third of the whole book.
Wow.
So there's a narrative poem about my experiences as what I call a near survivor. Our apartment was a block as the crow flies from the World Trade Center.
Wow.
I was there that morning. I saw the buildings on fire from my living room window. And I saw, people jumping and chunks of the building falling down. This was within 20 minutes of the first plane going into it. And I fled that morning. And you would think that the most traumatic aspect of my experience was that day. It took me 12 hours to be reunited with my husband. I traveled about 100 miles at a huge circular route and ended up in a stranger's home. However, it took a while for it to sink in how thorough the disruption was going to be.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so that's why the proportions of the book are as they are.
So for the third of the book that is about the day and the day after, I guess a lot of that is directly from your own experience.
Yes, I decided that my experience was different from the other experiences I was reading about and hearing about in the media, and that as a person who lived in the neighborhood and who's a neighborhood that was destroyed that morning. I wanted to talk about that. I felt like that aspect of the experience was not being written about. I mean, obviously, in the scheme of things, a survivor's first-person account of a neighborhood that was destroyed and a life that was changed that morning is much less important than that of the people who died and the people who were in the towers who fled, which obviously I was not. But, I believe that all stories are important, and I wanted to contribute to the record of this day.
Yeah.
So that's what I did.
Yeah. And you called yourself a near survivor. What is it that makes you think that you're not just a survivor?
Well, I am a survivor, but I lived, I fled that morning. I was exposed to the dust. Yeah. I'm in the World Trade Center health registry because of the health problems I've had ever since as a result of that day. Some of those health problems, thank God, I don't have, like the different kinds of cancers triggered by the heavy metals that were released when the building dissolved and burnt. So my asthma and my other related problems, as serious as they are nothing. So that's what the near is about. It sort of positions me between a close survivor and a survivor who might have lived further away, but whose life was impacted by everything that happened.
Yeah, and of course, a lot of people were impacted directly with these health conditions, and the world in general has been impacted. We've made all sorts of changes to security, and of course, the war on terror happened almost directly as a result of 9/11.
Yes, it did. I wasn't in favor of it at the time, and history has shown that it was not a good decision. Although when you have been under attack, your ideas about how human beings can get along together without killing each other undergoes a big challenge. So I was afraid for a long time after 9/11, and I count myself as one of the people whose fear was used by certain military influences to make decisions which turned out to be mistakes. So I think the world changed on 9/11. I think we've seen ample evidence of the many ways it's changed and is continuing to change. So I don't know what the situation in Ukraine will be when this airs, but certainly the pictures of the refugees, the victims, the damage done to buildings, to cities, to towns, to landscape, sadly that dredges up a lot of memories for me. And although it isn't the invasion of Ukraine isn't directly the result of, or even indirectly the result of 9/11, the sort of shifting world order and the prevalence of violence and all kinds of disasters, natural and man-made, which I would say characterize the last 20 years, are, it seems like 9/11 was the beginning of the era in which we live today.
Yeah, absolutely. They say, don't they, that there was a world before 9/11 and a world after 9/11, and I think they're starting to kind of use that same thing for COVID as well. There was a world before COVID and a world after.
Well, COVID is part of the way the world changed, and it's certainly the loss of life during COVID swamps the loss of life for 9/11.
Yeah.
You can't even mention them really in the same breath. But the sense that all world orders, I want to back up and say that, yes, there was a world before 9/11, but we had information then that we could have taken advantage of and didn't, which might have prevented 9/11. It's hard to say. I think it's a huge paradigm shift in the world. It's a global world now, much more so than it was even on 9/11. And so the proliferation of information through different media, the connections of people through global businesses, the fact that shutting down McDonald's in Russia is a huge hardship for a lot of Russians. I don't think that would have been the case on 9/11. It had started. So, I think the most immediate traumatic loss that the world has gone through is definitely COVID, and which is still ongoing.
Yeah.
I follow the statistics in Britain. We've spent a lot of time in Britain. We lived there for 9 months. We've gone there maybe a couple of dozen times for work and for pleasure since the 90s, basically. And so I have many friends there about whom I want to tell about your radio show. So you'll have to let me know when it airs. And so I followed what's gone on there with as much sorrow as in my country and in all the other countries around the world, some of which are still suffering terribly. I don't know how things have been in your part of Britain, but...
Well, it's a weird thing where the cases are rising, but they're getting rid of the rules.
Yes, it doesn't make sense to me either. The same thing is happening over here. Yeah. I'm in a high-risk group, partly because of 9/11. I have this thing called a comorbidity. What a term. It's a new word in our vocabulary. So I'm going to have to keep masking when I'm in close public spaces when the rest of the world is not. And we're, fingers and toes crossed that it keeps the number of infections continues to keep waning and no new variant comes along.
Although, I think sometimes when a new variant comes along, the death rate decreases, but I don't know if it happens every time.
Yeah, I mean, the death rate decreased for the most recent variant in this country.
Yeah.
People weren't hospitalized to the same degree. But the massive numbers of people who were sick put us back up to where we were 2 years ago. And, let's mention all the countries around the world which haven't been able to get vaccinated. The people in countries where you could get vaccinated, I guess I might be stepping in it here, but who won't get vaccinated because of the distrust of science. And I feel like the sense of community, that we're all in this together, has frayed so badly that people don't understand that to get vaccinated isn't so much for yourself, although it does help, but it's to help protect other people and the spread of the disease. I took the sugar cube with the polio vaccine when I was a kid, as did everyone in my town.
Yeah.
And polio's basically gone. So, I believe that vaccines make a difference.
Well, yeah, there's a reason that we don't have the polio vaccine anymore, and it's because it worked.
Well put. So, pithy as someone who has a radio show should be.
Yeah.
So.
Has writing poetry about 9/11 and other things really helped you heal your fear and, everything that you've witnessed?
I would have to say yes. It never goes away entirely. If you're present at a world-changing event with a lot of loss of life, you're never the same after.
Yeah.
And it takes a while to accept that and to learn to live with it. I do believe that talking about difficult experiences is better than keeping it all in.
Yeah.
For one's sanity, I'd say. I don't think that's the only aspect. That's the only thing that you need to do to recover, to the extent that you recover from this kind of experience. But I felt purposeful in writing this book, even though it's, to some degree about my experiences. It's about a lot of other people's experiences as well. And it took me out of myself and helped me to see the totality of the experience better. But that being said, this book was published for the 20th anniversary of 9/11, which was last September. It took me 18 years to write this book because the material was very difficult, as you can imagine. I wrote other things during that time. I published 2 other collections, neither of which had anything whatsoever to do with 9/11. Thank goodness. Yeah. Maybe that's what kept me sane. And people who knew me and knew that I was working on this, I think they would throw up their hands and in incomprehension. Why are you still working on this? Get on with your life. But when the book was published, I did feel a completion of my experience, and that it's out there. It's part of the literature about 9/11, both the creative literature and the historical record about 9/11. And that has freed me from the weight of these memories more than actually writing the book. But of course, it wouldn't be out there if I hadn't written the book. So anyway, and I can't wait to work on something else. So I have many ideas. I actually wrote a new poem the other day. This year is pretty much devoted to getting September 12th out into the world and getting it a readership.
Yeah.
And that in itself is both rewarding and exhausting. Every time I give a reading, I try to read from all the different sections of the book, some of which there's some humor in it, believe it or not, some of which are lyrical poems of natural beauty. Some of it are argumentative poems. So I try to read a range of them, but I always try to read some of the historical narrative about my experiences. And the day after a reading, I am exhausted. I don't know how actors do it, to tell you the truth. Get on stage every night and dig down deep in themselves, and I'll give the audience some of that personal truth. It's, of course, they didn't write it. Shakespeare wrote it, so maybe that's easier that way. I don't know, so this year is mostly about that.
Yeah.
And I'm grateful that people like you are still interested in talking about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Have you got any plans on what you might do for your next project, or are you just thinking about this one for now?
Well, I have to confess, my next project is almost finished.
Wow.
Because I wrote it. It was what I did after the last book before September 12th. I threw myself into this. So I was sort of working on the two projects at the same time. And that's a book. My father was a World War II soldier who fought in Europe in the Battle of the Bulge. He died without ever telling me anything about his experiences. But his wartime service was cast a shadow over my entire childhood and adolescence. And I came across a packet of his memorabilia from the war after he died. And I'm trying to figure out what he did, where he was, what he saw, because he ended up at a facility in Biarritz, which was for traumatized American soldiers.
Yeah.
It was an unconsciously successful program to tackle PTSD. So I'm learning that about him, even though I don't know what it was which prompted him to be admitted sounds like it was a hospital. It was a university for American students, which tried to get them to look forward into civilian life after they had been discharged, after the war was over. He was coincidentally there when we dropped the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So he went there before the Pacific Theater War was over, and they kept American soldiers in Europe until that was decided, thinking they might need to be shipped to the Far East to fight over there. And it would be cheaper to keep them in Europe than to send them east. But they created this world in Biarritz, which simulated what life might be like when the soldiers went home. They didn't have to wear uniforms. They took classes. They had a lot of cultural activities. One of the pieces of memorabilia I discovered was a program from a bullfight in Bayonne. I had no idea that my father had ever been to a bullfight.
Yeah.
But many other things. And there's even a picture of him on the beach, which as a child, he loved the beach. So what happened as a result of starting to explore these is that the connections between his experience in World War II and how it cast this shadow, how he carried it forward through the rest of his life, which I perceived as a shadow over my life, is parallel to what happened to me on 9/11.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, where are we able to find your latest book, September 12th?
Well, in the UK, you can order it through Book Depository, free shipping. I don't know if you can order it. You could probably go to a local bookstore and order it there. You can also order it through my distributor in the United States, which is called SPD, Small Press Distributors, and they ship abroad. Anywhere in the world, as far as I understand, as does pretty much Book Depository, although they're probably not shipping to Russia and Ukraine these days. And the last thing, if that's all unsuccessful, listeners can email me through my website. There's a link, and request it, and I will facilitate their getting a copy.
Great. Well, many thanks for coming on the show today. It's been great talking to you.
Thanks so much, Toby. Thanks for being such a good listener.